Welcome to Snow Talk, the podcast series that brings you in-depth interviews for an insider's look at what makes our industry work. We will be speaking with snow industry professionals about life, about business and leadership in this often challenging and always satisfying industry. This episode of Snow Talk is brought to you by Western Snowplows. And now, enjoy Snow Talk, sponsored by Western.
When plowing is your profession, it's up to you to keep the world moving through winter's worst. Less time worrying about your equipment is more time for clearing lots. So we'll cut to the chase. Only Western builds efficiency into every feature of our plows and spreaders. With 65 years of experience behind us, we know what it takes to save time and stay profitable. So we make one promise: more jobs done faster.
Welcome back to Snow Talk, the official podcast of the Snow and Ice Management Association. I'm your host, Evan Newman. This podcast is where we get real about the challenges, lessons, and leadership behind the professional snow and ice management industry. We're very excited to be diving into something that can be both incredibly rewarding as well as incredibly challenging as a leader, and that's building an engaged team and making the tough calls when someone potentially no longer fits into the culture that you've worked hard to build as a leader. So joining me today is someone who knows this space well, Kevin Stanish, CSP and owner at Adirondack Customs. So welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, Evan.
Excited to have you on board, and thanks for all you do for SIMA. And it was good seeing you there a few months ago in Grand Rapids at the symposium. So jumping right in, when we talk about team engagement, it's easy to think about things like happy hours or team lunches or some of those fun things that we do, or the tailgate safety talks that go on around the yard. But in your experience, what does a truly engaged team look like in the industry, or for you guys that are on that Customs?
So for us, we run on EOS at this point, but from day one, we always had a certain set of values that we wanted to abide by. And an aligned team at its real base level is people that act upon instinct in the same direction, but that doesn't happen by accident. You have to intentionally build a culture so that people are moving consistently in the same direction.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know a lot of folks in the space are really driving into the EOS and leaning into that entrepreneurial operating system for their team. So I think that's awesome that you guys are using it and have found some success. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about what's worked with aligning the mission with some of your work. So engagement being more about aligning than activity, how have you been intentional about building the team or building your company up?
So really, when it comes down to engagement, you have to be honest with yourself. You can use any kind of buzzword or any kind of phrasing that you want, but if it doesn't actually fit you and doesn't fit what you are about, people see through it instantly. And then your culture is going to suffer because of it. So full transparency, I'm a Christian. So one of the things that we align around is a biblical-based culture. Now, that may not be for everybody, and that's okay. But for us, every week, we spend a little bit of time in a company-paid Bible study. And I use that as an example, not to push people towards any kind of religious argument, but because it is a stated part of our culture, and it is something we also spend time doing and we invest in, we see the results coming out of it. Anything that you do to promote engagement has to be something you're willing to put your money where your mouth is. You have to engage in it from the leadership top all the way down in order for it to actually stick.
I love that, Kevin. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your faith with us. All of us come from all different walks of life. Sharing that maybe helps the team be stronger, have a greater level of trust in folks. And, if it's not faith, I've heard other people talk about book clubs that they have within their organization. They're listening to the same books, reading the same books, or listening to the same podcasts to where they can say, hey, I heard this. This is something we can dwell on, maybe focus on, or engage around, or think about to make our company better. In your case, it's a Bible study. And I think that's a great example of how we can come together and make the team a little better. So I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, follow-up to that, we did that for years before we took on EOS. But
sure,
EOS also promotes a very simple way of keeping people aligned and engaged. For instance, they use what's called a level 10 meeting. And that is something you can do as a simple tailgate talk. You can do it formally inside a conference room, but it's a way of gathering together, talking about what makes you uncomfortable and what you're finding is a good thing your team is doing, and promotes engagement by allowing people to have a voice.
Yeah, that's the key right there, is allowing someone to have the voice and allowing someone to feel comfortable to have that voice, because that's how the culture really grows. So now here's where things might get a bit uncomfortable, and I don't mean that in a negative way. We've talked about this, Kevin. You actually shared this with a team member of mine who then came back to me and said, hey, this would be a good topic for our podcast. Not everyone is going to be a fit for your culture. We hire people, they come, they leave, or they stay and they're long-term employees. Sometimes folks show that themselves out the door. Other times you have to show them the door, to be quite frank. So when talking with Simon Stafford, a recent trade show, you shared your experience of making a tough call and what it was like to have to get rid of someone that was pivotal to your team right in the middle of the snow season. That's what prompted this topic. How do you know when it's that time, and how do you go about making that decision?
So on the surface, that can be a really easy call. If you have things on a spreadsheet, if you have them charted out, hey, this is what we stand for, this is what we don't stand for, this is what we allow. But the reality is you're dealing with people, right? And people aren't perfect. And you're in any people-based system, you're going to have to take into account things like, are they having a bad day? Is there something going on at home that I'm not aware of? Is there a health issue going on? That sort of thing. Assuming you've crossed all those boxes, right? You've done your due diligence. That's the time that you have to step back and look at your core values. And that's when you really lean into what you built your company on, what you built your culture on, and what you're going to allow to come through that door. Because if you're not going to allow that kind of behavior to come through your door, why would you keep it in your house? And if you're not going to allow it to come through your door, you're not going to allow it to stay in your house, then it's time to move on.
You're right. You can't just have those core values up on the wall for everyone to look at whenever you come in every day without actually living by them and to understanding, is this the right fit? And is that person welcome in my house? Is that person welcome in my business? Are the best fit for my business to move forward and prosper? So I think that it is really an important point and something that more people probably need to think about on the daily whenever they're working with their team. If you have a great team, then you're lucky. You're one of the lucky folks that maybe don't have to think about that. But when labor is such an issue in this country, then thinking through some of these items, it's one we do have to think about. So what I've found is that as leaders, we often wait too long. We hope will get better, or maybe a negative situation, or we worry that maybe we're going to be too harsh. But in your experience, what happens when we don't make that decision and let the cancer, if you will, fester a bit within the organization?
Well, up front, I like what Dave Ramsey says. He says, I let people get free to succeed elsewhere. So in my case, I definitely waited too long. I looked at the skill level that I fell in love with. I looked at the person that I cared about. And most importantly, I looked at what I would value, and that's loyalty. But when you're talking about business and you're talking about fostering a team culture, you have to look at what's happening to the team. It's not about you, and it's not about the other individual. It's about the effect that bad team member is having on your team. And if the truth is that they're dragging your team down, if they're causing problems, then you have to put the team first, not yourself and not the other individual. It's good to release somebody to succeed elsewhere, because when you do, your team morale is going to go up, your team efficiency is going to go up, your retention of quality team members is going to go up. It's all positive. It just sucks getting to that moment to say, I got to let this person go.
Yeah, I'm sure that is a tough decision. I think that there's an old adage that you'd rather train people and have them leave than not train them and have them stay. So I think that's part of it too, is, we have to constantly be investing in our team, making sure they're the best out on the job, and maybe they have skill set they're bringing from a past role that they can really put into place. But at the end of the day, if they're not a good fit, or if it's time for them to go, maybe the timing just works out. Back to your Dave Ramsey piece, I think that's key. So Any other thoughts there? I see you maybe thinking about something. I want to make sure I don't gloss over it.
No, it's a really important part of this to think about. You can talk all day long to your people. You can tell customers what your preferences are. It's what you show them that's the most important. So when you're keeping somebody in that's not performing, what are you telling the other people that are part of that team? You're saying, I don't value your good performance as much as I value this person's poor performance. Or I don't value you when you're doing a good job
Right.
as much as I value keeping this person around because I like them. Now, when you're talking about a team-based mentality, the team feels it when somebody's not pulling their weight. The team feels it when somebody's dragging them down. So if you're, as a leader, telling your team that you'd rather keep this person around who's underperforming versus cutting them loose, they're already doing the work anyway. In the case of the person I fired, my project manager came up to me afterward and said, did you realize I was doing his job? And I said, yeah, that's one of the factors why I got rid of him. Because you're already doing the work. Why am I paying him for you to do his work? Why don't I just pay you more to do his work? Right? And your people feel that. They feel whether or not you value their good work or that you value the bad work. You can show them by releasing that person to a new career with a new company.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really strong reminder, I think, is that the people feel it. And there's an energy within the team that is impacted if someone's not fully engaged in the day-to-day with the company and not fully, I guess, pulling their weight, for lack of a better way to put it. And I think we see it regardless of team size, whether it's 5 people or 50 people on a team. We see that. So it's about protecting the energy and the trust. While we recognize that this couldn't have been easy for you, Kevin, I appreciate you sharing this road. It's important to share these stories. So given that it was during the middle of the winter, tell me a little bit about how folks maybe stepped up. And this had to have been a hard decision. This is, prime time in upstate New York, that you're navigating. You're navigating the winter months. So share a little bit about that with me.
So let's keep in mind a couple of things. One, I should have done this a couple months prior, right? So I didn't earn the right to make this decision the first week of December. I put myself in that corner. And more importantly, I put the team in that corner. And when you're dealing with an area like we have where it regularly snows or regularly precipitates, we didn't have a dry weekend from the middle of November up until the middle of June. So we're actively working on our snow contracts regularly. And when that's happening and you're saying to your operations team, hey, I just had to remove your leader. Let's still take on this expansion of 60% more work. What? I pulled your leader out. That's a heavy ask, right? But how you know as a leader you're making the right call is when your team responds the way mine did. And I have to admit, I was pretty freaked out.
Yeah.
But I was relying on the things that we had laid in the off season, right? We had been building through EOS these systems. We've been building through EOS these teams. We've been refining what we do, and that paid off. So our customer satisfaction rate was as high as it's ever been. We did 60% more work with less people. I did not rehire that position for snowy season. And our team morale ratings, our team efficiency ratings went through the roof. That tells you as a leader, you're making the right call of addition by subtraction.
Yeah, awesome point. And I think that sometimes we overlook how it's going to impact members of the team. And we all often say, oh man, we're putting more work on folks. But in reality, you're empowering that next level of leadership in your organization to say, hey, I want to step up. I want to be him. I want to be the guy or the woman that's going to take over and be a positive force within this organization. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And we saw that from the guys that were coming in as just strict mercenary shift help all the way up to the mid-level management. Every single one that was involved in the organization leveled up through the course of the season. People were taking on more than they had before. And what I found as a hidden lesson in this particular case was it wasn't just that this individual was the most skilled that we had in the building. Because of either through his mannerisms, leadership style, whichever, he was either intentionally or not, the effect was he was pushing down those future leaders around him rather than building them up. And by pushing them down, he was lowering our efficiency and lowering our morale, and in fact, hurting the culture. But by removing that person from the situation, people were happy knowing that they had upward mobility, that they could take on more and thrive in that situation. And overall, we're entering into our next snow season as a much stronger company just by simply pulling away something that was a bottleneck.
I love that. And I think it's exciting for your team. And now, looking dead down the barrel at the month of August, sounds like your team's ready for the next winter and ways that you can conquer fall and transition into winter in a meaningful way together. Before we jump and talk a little bit more about culture, talk a little bit more about engaging of the team, I'd like to just take a moment to thank our episode sponsors over at Western Fisher at SnowX. Thanks to the Douglas Dynamics brands at Western Fisher SnowX for supporting Snow Talk and the podcast itself. So thank you. Let's talk about the how with some of this. So obviously you don't get to this point, Kevin, by saying, okay, I'm going to get rid of this individual during arguably the toughest time of the season and then roll in, have this faith in your team. We talked a little bit about faith earlier, this faith in your team. So it sounds like EOS was a big part of that. Culture obviously has to be a big part of that. How is that something that you all were able to accomplish, if you don't mind me asking?
So we like to talk in the industry about the difference between being a SIMA member and being a chuck in the truck, right? So I would say this as a comparative. We talk about snow being 24/7, 365. You prepare in the off season for what happens in the season. It's the same with culture. You prepare in the good times, you prepare before you grow for those times when they do get tough. So you're laying a foundation that will stand the test that you're going to see, because we're all going to have them. EOS was a great tool and continues to be a great tool for helping us organize and get structure. But up front, I'm going to say it's the foundation of faith that really paid off. For instance, to get a little transparent here, this same individual a couple years ago had a significant family event going on that he kept to himself for a while. And it did affect his work, and it did require him to take some extra time off. So our company stood in for him, paid for some time that he had to take off that he didn't have remaining PTO for, supplied him with a company truck for some extended trips that he had to take to be with his family, things like that nature. I don't say that to toot my own horn. I say it for this. When you are making those steps and making those decisions before you get to the point of saying this guy's got to go, this person's got to go, you better darn well know that you've already answered those questions of, is this a family issue that's going on, a health issue, right? Is there some kind of family situation that we can't wrap our minds around that's affecting this individual's work? You better know there's not something of that nature before you enter into this person's got to go, or this person needs a come to Jesus conversation. Once you have done that homework and you are sure this is not affecting the individual from an outside source that is reasonable to say, okay, yeah, your mom passed, you definitely need some time, right? Then you need to step into your core values and you need to step into your faith, because they're both foundational. So for instance, our core value number one is trustworthy. If we can't trust you, you don't come in the building, right? Our number three one is self-accountability. If you're a leader, if you cannot be held accountable, just like you're holding those underneath you accountable, you don't stay. So when those core values were not being upheld by this individual, it makes it very easy to say, yep, they're not abiding by the contract that they've made being employed here. They're not responding to the corrective action. So they do need to go. It's kind of an A plus B equals C scenario.
Yeah, that's a good breakdown. There's so much dignity in doing it the right way. You've obviously tried your best to do it the right way. Obviously, we climb the mountain and we sometimes fall as we climb the mountain. You put it really well right there. You're like, hey, you just need context in some situations. And that's where trust comes into play. I just got back from a conference in Toledo, Ohio, where we talked a lot about asking the right questions to provide context. So it's about asking the right questions of your team to build some of that context so that you do ensure that it's not a situation that's outside of work, but they are in alignment with your standards as a company. So anyway, now that I've painted that, sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is letting them go. We talked about how your team grew. How do you feel like you grew as a leader, and how do you feel like this has prepared you for future scenarios?
I would say it built my trust further in knowing what you know before you know it. So in this scenario, because of EOS allowing me with systems to step back and work more on my business rather than in it, I felt this before I saw it. Wrote a note in our script, right? It's kind of like entering into that spooky house, that haunted house scenario. I would say it told me that it's even more vital than I was paying attention to before about stepping back from the day to day on the business so that I can look down on it rather than being into it. If I had been able to do that sooner, I would have picked up on this sooner. So to me, it made it seem even more vital from an owner's perspective or a senior leader's perspective that you have to take time to step back from the business and look down and look on your business rather than staying in it. When you're in it, you miss things.
Very good point. Sometimes taking that bird's eye view, that 15,000 feet view up, can give you what you need to succeed as a leader. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you being vulnerable to share with me, okay, here's how my team grew, but also how I grew. So how do you maintain that culture after letting someone go? So the reason I ask that is sometimes, even though that person maybe hasn't been pulling your weight and that's recognizable in the organization, there are some times whenever someone's let go from a team and then the team starts to do a little bit of folding because they like that person individually or personally. So how did you ensure that the team stayed tight-knit and it was able to weather the storm, no pun intended?
So I can first preface that by saying this. Don't do exactly what I did and what I'm about to tell you. This is not an endorsement of Kevin's actions. So the day that I had this firing of this individual, I called the entire team together on a project, and for lack of a better term, I let them have it. Because as a team, they were failing. And I knew that a big portion of it was the leader's issue. Don't do that. But afterward, what I would say I did, and I would highly recommend for your team, is I would be very clear on why you let that person go. You don't need to necessarily, let's say it's a different scenario, they're stealing from you or having some kind of work relationship that's not appropriate. I wouldn't go into it in that case. But in this case, for lack of performance, for not following our core values, for not upholding the responsibilities of their position, was fully transparent with the team. We all sat down, we had a conversation. Said, why do you think that this person should have been let go? Why do you think I did it? And listen to the feedback, respond to the tough questions. I got one, frankly, from one of the carpenters on the team that said, he's my friend. He's a good carpenter, right? He's a snow guy. Why is somebody that's good being let go? So having that tough 20 minutes in front of the entire team of saying, this is how this lays out. I'm not using people's names, right? But for the carpenter to look at the supervisor and say, okay, well, this operations manager didn't do this. I thought he was, right? For lack of a better term, let's just call him Matt's the guy that got fired, and Josue is the guy asking questions. So when Josue is asking me, why did Matt get fired? Being able to respond back and say, well, our core values, it says we have to first be trustworthy, right? And if I'm giving Matt a set of assignments for the day and you guys aren't seeing that, so you don't know what the scope of work is, and you're just going off what is told, how can you trust that that's the correct scope of work? If Matt was not willing to be corrected on performance failures, but yet expected you guys to correct, how is that being self-accountable, right? If Matt was the first person to go home instead of the last being a supervisor, how is that being a good team member? That's one of our core values as well, right? If Matt never stepped out of the loader, so to speak, and yet expected you guys to step out of your trucks to help the shoveling crew, how is that demonstrating an old school work ethic? That's our fourth core value. By laying it out chapter and verse again, against your core values that everybody signs a contract to from me on down, how can you reasonably expect to keep that person on, right? That's the turning point for us, where when they saw how we would apply the core values, that we would actually stick to what we were saying when it came time to walk the walk. That's what was our turning point.
And the team bought in. Transparency is key across the board. And that's what really sounds like has built that level of trust within the organization. It's a great firsthand example.
If you were looking at this from the same perspective that you would look at it with your parents, saying, do as I say, not as I do. That transparency allows you to show the guys in the crew, the girls in the crew, the other people in the organization, hey, we actually stand for this and we're holding our leadership accountable to it. We're not saying to you, do as I say, not as I do. We are saying we are going to do exactly what we say at every level of the organization. And we are comfortable with being held accountable. When you have that level of trust that comes from transparency and accountability, your culture is going to shoot through the roof.
And that, Kevin, is a great point. And it leads me to my final question during our time together here today is, as we wrap up, what advice would you give to another snow contractor who's struggling with a disengaged team member or a team leader? That's even more difficult situation, team leader, or someone who isn't a good culture fit, but is someone that maybe is loved within the team or really liked and isn't sure how to let them go. And maybe it's not that they're liked, maybe it's because they're really strong in their skill set and in their snow plowing ability or their shoveling ability, or the big loss right now is maybe they're a great mechanic, but they just aren't, a good fit for the team. What would the advice be from you to them as we come to a close here?
I'd say first, you make sure you check yourself before you start looking at other people. So in this situation, I made sure to look at myself against the core values. Did I do my job properly? Once you've crossed that threshold, then I would say stop falling in love with the skill set. That's what held me back from this decision. And truthfully, if I had made that decision 3 months earlier, we would be 3 months stronger. So I would say that it always hurts to rip the Band-Aid off. It always hurts to make that decision. That escapes me right now which author said it, but he's saying any hard decision like this takes 72 hours, 48 hours to stew over it, and 24 hours to get over it. So in other words, the 48 hours before you make that call, you're stewing over the what ifs. And the 24 hours afterward, you're adjusting to the reality you made. But I would say to any leader that's looking at a massively qualified skill set or a person that you've got a lot of history with, is step back. Take a moment to look at yourself. Take a moment to look at your core values, and then take an honest comparison. Look at that leader. And if they need to go, they need to go. Your team will be better off for it. If they don't, take every opportunity to try and make that person correct their course. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.
Awesome point. Something I appreciate you reminding us of. And I think to add to that, what I've heard other folks say is, remember that you're protecting your business and your livelihood and your investment. And it's something that as a leader in the industry, if you're an owner like Kevin listening to this podcast, or if you're, in the executive team of your organization, you're protecting your organization, and protecting the organization comes with the responsibility to potentially make that hard decision. I really do appreciate those thoughts, Kevin. I think that they're powerful and important. So as we come to the end of our discussion today, I just want to say thanks. It's a vulnerable topic. It's one that's important, though, because team culture in today's labor atmosphere, as I mentioned earlier, is something that's very important. It's something that we need to be investing time, energy, and effort into all the time. Sounds like EOS is a great system to do some of that, to make sure you're filling the holes, but also some of the other pieces you're using are obviously filling the gap. So I guess I'll leave you an open stage here, Kevin. What other things would you say as we come to a close in our dialogue today would be, hey, I have a captive audience. I need to tell this to the snow community who listens to the Snow Talk every month.
I would say this: don't ever be comfortable as a leader where you are. Always push to increase the level of your leadership capabilities. Own your mistakes, be transparent about them, but make sure you're growing. The decisions I'm talking about, the advice, I guess, so to speak, we're giving today, they don't come out of a vacuum, and I certainly couldn't have given them to you guys 5 years ago. I didn't have that skill set, and I fully anticipate that I would have better answers and handle the situation better 5 years from now because I'm actively growing. That's one of the great things about SIMA is they're promoting professional growth. And I want to say thanks to you, Evan, because I do listen to this podcast on a regular basis. It is one of the mechanisms I use for growth. And I would encourage anybody listening to take advantage of as many opportunities as possible, like this, like going to symposium, like going to all the other industry events to grow. That's the number one thing you can do as a leader to increase the performance and increase the size and whatever metric you want to use on your business. You want your business to get better? Grow yourself.
I love that. Those are great parting words. Not because it's a plug for some of the stuff we do here at SIMA, but more importantly, it's a plug for the investment in yourself, and that's huge. That's key, no matter what industry you're in. So Kevin, I appreciate you. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. If today's episode hit home, feel free to share it with a colleague or leave us a review over on one of the platforms, Apple or Spotify. And Kevin, can you tell folks, if you don't mind, how to reach you, how to connect or learn more about Adirondack Customs so that they know before we jump off?
Sure. I'm happy to connect with any SIMA member or anybody else listening. My website is AdirondackCustoms.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, which is a great way to hit me. I'm also on Instagram and other areas. You can find me on the SIMA website if you want my digits to be able to call me direct. And I'm happy to talk to anybody and everybody about snow and also about leadership.
Yeah, Kevin's right. If you need him, that's right. I should be plugging this. The directory.simon.org is the place to find him. So good point, Kevin. So I appreciate it. And until next time, stay safe and get ready because winter is coming. So I appreciate everyone listening. And thanks again, Kevin.
Thanks for joining us for Snow Talk, sponsored by Western Snowplows. We hope you enjoyed it. Check out the latest episodes of Snow Talk, including any you may have missed, at www.sima.org/podcast.